You have finally reached level 50 and have unlocked the Paragon board, and you are excited to put points there and there and there and get all of the nodes, but is that wise? Well, if you've just started to level right now, if you've watched some of our leveling videos and got to level 50 successfully, then you might be faced with a couple of questions. Paragon board, what is the best way? Do you just like flail around and try to figure out what works? I mean, you can definitely do that, and that's a fun part of the game to kind of experience and experiment with all the things that you can get, but there are obviously more efficient ways to save you time, save you gold, and help you get that power earlier to level up quicker because, you know, gotta get that level 100 before the season starts, am I right? Well, here are 10 things that I personally wish I knew before I started my Paragon board filling up journey that would have saved me a bunch of gold, a bunch of time, and made leveling a little bit easier. And I probably would have been higher level by now if I knew some of these things. And hey, you may know one or two of these things, but I bet your butt you don't know all of them, so let's get right into it. The first thing that you need to be aware of is that refunding your Paragon board will be turbo expensive as you go later into the game, so prepare your gold accordingly. You might start with one build and end up with a totally different build when you get to like level 70, level 80, and so on and so forth, depending on what's good for your class, depending on what you want to play, and it can get all the way up to 39,000 gold per node refunded, and that can be quite a bit. Obviously, you will be refunding to kind of optimize your build, or you might not, but if you want to be very conservative with your gold, the second point is to choose your build early. And this is kind of in line with how the devs want to design and want us to play the game, because they want refunding to be expensive, they want it to be cumbersome, so that we can choose a build. For instance, if I'm playing a werebear build and I'm at level 80 or level 90, a full-on werebear build, it might probably be cheaper for me to level a second druid and play werewolf or play storm or play earth or play anything like that. That's essentially how they want the game to be. Now, whether or not they will keep to this mentality going further into the seasons and into the future, we don't know. But for now, unless you want to spend gazillion gold to always have to refund or level up another one, plan your build and choose it early. And going into this point, the third point is to study your future Paragon boards, because they can definitely make it easier to plan your boards accordingly. The easiest way to do this, obviously, is to look at your Paragon board and click one of the exit nodes. This will give you a list of the Paragon boards that are available for you to pick once you've reached this point. Obviously, you get this once you filled your first Paragon board anyway, but looking up at your future boards can give you a hint of like, okay, what am I gonna do? Am I gonna go this way? Okay, that's gonna be good, so that you don't have to spend too much time into it or figuring out once you get to that point. But mostly so that you can check the rare nodes as well, because the rare nodes are a good source of the power, and we're going to get into the rare nodes a little bit more. And you can also check the preview to preview the positioning of the board, and this can help with your route planning, with what nodes you want to get. You can expect or prepare for some of these nodes, and it's going to make your journey a little bit smoother. Now, the fourth point that I kind of wish I knew a lot earlier is to do your renown. Now, with this factors into how you play the game. I personally like to do the story. I spent a lot of time listening to the dialogues and doing all that kind of stuff. I did quite a few side quests, but not that many. Although side quests are very good to get renowned, they're not the best. Some of the best ways to get renowned is obviously get the Lilith altars, is to get the strongholds, which I have neglected for a very long time, also to discover the areas and so on and so forth. And now I'm kind of paying the price for not having, I don't know, 5, 10, 6 extra Paragon points that I could have put in by this point and made my current leveling a lot easier. Probably could have reached my legendary node a lot sooner. Probably could have had my second glyph socket by now. And for instance, Marcellian, which is close to my level, is already in his third Paragon board while I'm still in my second. So doing your renown is very important, and depending on how you play the game, this could be a higher priority for you than you might think. The fifth point is something that I'm just discovering right now, is that vulnerable damage is way more important than I think. Obviously, vulnerable damage applies to a lot more other things than just your Paragon board, obviously skills and gear as well, but it's very important for the Paragon board as well, because vulnerable damage is something that's going to scale you into late game to be able to kill stuff. And there's also vulnerable glyphs. One of the best examples is the Exploiter glyph that everybody has access to. It's a very good glyph. You can, take it into consideration early on and level it, and we'll get to that in a second as well. Vulnerable is king. And speaking of just stats that you get everywhere, you have to know your stats. A couple of things here. Obviously, this changes based on your class and probably based on your playstyle as well. But as of now, what we know so far is that resistances are pretty dog shit. They don't really give you that much tankiness as you might think, whether it comes from your gems, whether it comes from your actual stats, whether it comes from your Paragon nodes. Resistances are not very useful, so going for nodes that give you resistances will not give you as much value as going for something that's, let's say, armor or max HP. At least not now. We know that resistances will be addressed eventually and they will become better in the future. But until then, keep your eyes on armor and stuff like that. Also, each spec in the game has a particularly secondary stat that's better than the rest. I'm gonna use myself as an example, but of course take into consideration your own class. My druid, specifically for werebear, likes willpower. And I mean likes willpower. It's so good. Willpower factors into a lot of the aspects of the game. Obviously, it's good for all classes, but specifically for me, since I do a lot of overpower hits, a lot of overpower damage, willpower is king. And a lot of nodes will take that into consideration, will give me willpower and will reward me for having willpower. Another thing that I figured out with my bear halfway through my Paragon journey is that intelligence is the next best secondary stat that I definitely need, and I found myself in situations where I had not enough intelligence to unlock more power into my gear. Obviously, once again, intelligence is good for a lot of other things, but specifically for the Paragon, for the werebear, it's probably the second best stat that you can get. Because with these, you can unlock stuff like 10% more damage, more armor, more max life, and so on and so forth. And with this comes the fact that's maybe not as obvious, is that gear is important with Paragon nodes. Because obviously they give secondary stats, they synergize really well, and you want to double dip, triple dip, quadruple dip as much as possible into a particular thing so that it can keep scaling. Whether that's vulnerable damage, whether that's secondary stats, whether that's damage to slow, to stun, to whatever you want, that's very important, particularly because gear is your main source of the stats that unlocks specific powers within your Paragon board. Once again, I come back to my druid that wants willpower and intelligence. Gear pieces that have particular secondary stats like willpower and intelligence can sometimes be better than me just getting raw damage. I've had weapons or wrists or things that had a lot of secondary stats in terms of intelligence and willpower, but lower item power than higher item power items that had better stats overall. But because I was not meeting my bonus requirements with the intelligence and willpower, my lower item power items turned out to be better than my bigger ones because I just needed those secondary stats. So gear is important, and you want to make sure that your gear matches your Paragon journey. Number 8 is that rare nodes are way more important than you think. And at least in the first couple of boards, they will probably be the biggest chunk of your power as a character. Obviously, this depends on the board and the build and how the tuning goes and how the devs will balance all the classes. But as of now, I'm probably getting about 40 to 60% more damage from rare nodes than I'm getting from anything else. Rare nodes are very good, most of all because of those bonus requirements that I mentioned. And this is where a lot of the previous points will come into fruition, where you want to make sure that you're getting the rare nodes, first of all, that are on the right path to where you want to go, that have the right prerequisite nodes that build into what it can reward you as a bonus. For instance, I have a rare node that gives me 10% damage. It gives me 10% more if I have a specific amount of a secondary stat. That is very important. Obviously comes from gear, obviously comes from all the other nodes, and that's just way more damage than I have without. And I'll tell you this much, once I've broken up my gear and missed some of these requirements, I felt it and I was particularly useless. I had to be carried until I got the gear back up and running. And speaking of, normal and magical nodes are not boring. Let me explain. They are boring. They're boring in the sense that they just give flat 5 intelligence, dexterity, strength, willpower, and all of that. That's pretty boring in a vacuum. However, they're not as boring in terms of planning out your build, because they obviously give you the stats that you want to meet those bonuses from the rare nodes, but they can also plan your build. You're probably going to be playing with these the most, trying to figure out exactly what are the best willpower or intelligence or strength or dexterity nodes to get. Can you afford to get a few extra damage reduction nodes that can help you survive? All of that goes well into planning a path through your Paragon board. So keeping in mind these and not just randomly selecting them left and right can be really good, because you can also balance your gear with the nodes. If you need more intelligence and you can get them through the nodes, you can afford to sacrifice some gear and maybe get some better gear and get the intelligence from your nodes, or vice versa. Maybe you have some non-stat nodes, maybe you have some damage reduction while fortified, and you need those secondary stats. You can just get those through the gear and instead get the nodes that you want. So the bouncing back and forth is probably where you're going to spend most of your time with the nodes so far, so plan accordingly. And last but not least, the glyph level is giga important. After all the nerfs to XP gains where you don't get as much through dungeons as you used to, everybody is basically leveling through nightmare dungeons, which is the ideal way to get XP, but also coincidentally the only way to level up your glyphs. This, of course, is as important as glyphs are for your particular spec and playstyle. For instance, as a werebear, I really want my werebear glyph, and ideally I want to get more glyphs later on, like the Explorer and things like that. For Marcellian's Whirlwind Barbarian, having one glyph socket is usually enough, and is probably better off getting rare nodes or legendary nodes instead of like breaking its path and wasting a lot of points to get a second socketed glyph. Either way, you will want at least one, and that one should be important, and you will level it through your nightmare dungeons. Not only will you get probably the best source of experience out there as of this moment, but you'll also level up your glyph and can make or break your build, or make the difference between you doing a lot more damage than somebody that's higher level, maybe has more gear than you, because it all scales in the end. So definitely we recommend, with this in mind, leveling past level 50 through nightmare dungeons. The best way to level through nightmare dungeons can change, and they're kind of constantly addressing this right now, although it still feels like it's a little bit too slow considering that season 1 is coming up close, but maybe that's a topic for a different video. These 10 things are at least 10 of the best things that I wish I knew going into the Paragon board. I'm sure maybe somebody covered them out online, but I didn't come across them when I needed them, so we're hoping that maybe you can find this very helpful and level up your Paragon board a little bit easier and a little bit less stress-free. And if we've missed anything whatsoever, leave a comment down below and let us know. Listen, this other thing you should know about can save you a bunch of time and money and all of that stuff, and we will appreciate you for it. Thank you for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.